How far would you go to protect your reputation when the ones you love most start exposing your darkest secrets? Demi Moore, once a Hollywood icon, now finds herself at the center of a firestorm as her daughters reveal the haunting truths behind their family's glittering facade. From allegations of betrayal to the fallout of her controversial relationships, Demi's life story is anything but a fairy tale. What drove her daughters to share these shocking revelations? How did a turbulent past shape their lives and hers? And can a family torn apart by fame and secrets ever find its way back together? Let's dive into the untold story of Demi Moore's rise, fall, and attempts at redemption. The story of Demi Moore doesn't begin in Hollywood's glittering spotlight. It begins in shadows, with a childhood so troubled it almost seems destined to shape a future filled with chaos and controversy. Born in 1962 in Roswell, New Mexico, Demi's entry into the world was anything but glamorous. Her parents, Charles and Virginia, had a rocky relationship marred by addiction and instability, setting the stage for a life defined by turbulence. As a child, Demi was surrounded by dysfunction. Her biological father left before she was born, leaving her mother to marry a man who would later adopt her. But this union didn't provide the stability one might hope for. Instead, her home was a revolving door of chaos, punctuated by her stepfather's alcoholism and her mother's erratic behavior. Virginia, struggling with her own demons, often brought chaos to Demi's doorstep in ways that would scar her for life. One of the most shocking revelations about Demi's childhood came to light years later. At just 15 years old, she experienced a betrayal so profound it would haunt her forever. According to Demi, her mother allegedly accepted $500 from an older man, granting him access to her daughter. This horrifying event wasn't just an act of betrayal, it was a devastating blow to Demi's sense of trust and safety. The man's chilling words, "How does it feel to be sold by your own mother?" echoed in her mind for years, a grotesque reminder of her vulnerability. But this wasn't the only way Demi's mother exposed her to danger. Virginia frequently took young Demi to bars, parading her around like bait to attract male attention. At an age when most girls are navigating high school drama and teenage crushes, Demi was learning how to survive in a world that treated her as an object before she even understood what it meant. The pattern of exploitation, whether intentional or not, laid the groundwork for Demi's complicated relationship with herself and those around her. Despite the chaos, Demi showed remarkable resilience. She knew she needed to escape the toxic environment she was trapped in. By the time she was a teenager, she had developed a determination that would become her hallmark. She dropped out of high school and began to carve her path, setting her sights on Hollywood as a way to reinvent herself and leave the pain of her past behind. Her move to Los Angeles marked the beginning of her transformation. It wasn't an instant rise to stardom. Demi took odd jobs and struggled like so many others chasing their dreams in the city of angels. But her striking looks and undeniable charisma quickly set her apart. She landed a few small roles, gradually building a name for herself in an industry that would later both elevate and consume her. By the early 1980s, Demi had started making waves. Her appearance in General Hospital introduced her to a broader audience, and she began to gain traction in the entertainment world. But as her career grew, so did the whispers about her troubled past. Hollywood, for all its glamour, thrives on gossip and scandal, and Demi's life was fertile ground for both. Stories about her childhood began to surface, adding a darker layer to her rising fame. The scars of her upbringing were impossible to ignore. Demi herself admitted that her experiences as a child left her with deep insecurities and a need for validation. These feelings would later manifest in ways that shocked even those closest to her. Her desperate quest to prove her worth to herself and the world became a defining theme of her life, one that would follow her into her relationships, her career, and her role as a mother. Looking back, it's almost ironic how much Demi's early life mirrored the plot of a tragic Hollywood film. The young girl who grew up in chaos, surrounded by addiction and betrayal, would go on to become one of the most iconic actresses of her time. But the trauma she carried with her wasn't left behind in New Mexico. It followed her, seeping into every aspect of her life and shaping the person she would become. As the 1980s progressed, Demi began to step into the limelight. Her striking beauty and undeniable talent were enough to catch the attention of casting directors, and her roles became more prominent. But even as she gained fame, the shadow of her past loomed large. For Demi, success wasn't just about achieving her dreams. It was about proving to herself that she was more than the broken girl her childhood had tried to define. The transition from her troubled teenage years to her early days in Hollywood wasn't just a geographical move, it was a psychological one. Demi had escaped the physical proximity of her mother's influence, but the emotional scars were still fresh. Her determination to rewrite her story became her driving force, but it also set the stage for the complexities that would define her adult life. Demi's star was rising in Hollywood, but fame came at a price. By the mid-1980s, she had cemented her place in the industry with roles in St. Elmo's Fire and the iconic Ghost, a performance that not only captured audiences' hearts, but also catapulted her into a league of her own. Yet beneath the glossy magazine covers and red carpet appearances, Demi's personal life remained in turmoil, a reflection of the scars she carried from her past. Her career wasn't built on mere luck. Demi's resilience and work ethic set her apart, but there was no denying that she felt the weight of proving her worth. The insecurities born from her chaotic upbringing lingered, pushing her to be perfect in every role, every public appearance, and every personal interaction. This drive for validation, though admirable, came with consequences that even her closest allies began to notice. Her marriage to Bruce Willis in 1987 was the talk of Hollywood. They were the ultimate power couple, Bruce, the rising action star, and Demi, the sophisticated leading lady. Together they seemed unstoppable, a perfect picture of success and glamour. But even as they started a family and welcomed their daughters, cracks began to appear in their seemingly flawless relationship. While Demi was busy navigating the demands of Hollywood, Bruce was no stranger to the pressures of his own skyrocketing career. The two were often apart, and their dynamic, though passionate, became increasingly strained. Demi's need for control extended beyond her career into her personal life. She wanted to be the perfect wife and mother, roles she'd never had modeled for her as a child. But trying to hold everything together was taking its toll. Her daughters, Rumor, Scout, and Tallulah, grew up in a world of privilege, but were often left to grapple with their mother's emotional absences. Demi loved them deeply, but her struggles with her identity and self-worth often left little room for the kind of connection they craved. Despite her best efforts to balance work and family, Demi's battle with addiction began to resurface. The pressure of maintaining her Hollywood image and her internal fears of inadequacy created a storm she couldn't weather alone. She had faced substance abuse in her younger years, but the stakes were higher now. She wasn't just a rising star anymore. She was a wife and a mother, and every misstep risked public scrutiny. The late 80s and early 90s were a time of professional triumphs for Demi. She became one of the highest-paid actresses in Hollywood, earning millions for roles in films like A Few Good Men and Indecent Proposal. Yet even with the accolades and financial success, she couldn't shake the ghosts of her past. It was as though the higher she climbed, the more vulnerable she became to the darkness she thought she'd left behind. Her marriage to Bruce Willis, though outwardly glamorous, began to show signs of strain. While they tried to maintain a united front, their differences became harder to ignore. Bruce's easygoing nature clashed with Demi's need for structure and control. Over time, the disconnect grew, and whispers of trouble in paradise started to make their way into the tabloids. The couple officially separated in 1998, ending what many had seen as one of Hollywood's fairy tale unions. The divorce was a turning point for Demi, both personally and professionally. As she tried to navigate life as a single mother, she also faced the reality that her career wasn't what it once was. Hollywood was changing, and the roles that once came to her so easily were now harder to secure. But instead of retreating, Demi chose to reinvent herself, a move that would lead to one of the most controversial chapters of her life. Her relationship with Ashton Kutcher, who was 15 years her junior, shocked the public. At a time when older men dating younger women was the norm, the reverse dynamic became a subject of intense scrutiny. Demi, once the picture of Hollywood sophistication, was now labeled by some as desperate and out of touch. The media had a field day, and every aspect of their relationship was dissected and sensationalized. For Demi, The relationship was a chance to start over. She was in love, and for a while, the age difference didn't seem to matter. Ashton brought a sense of fun and spontaneity into her life, something she hadn't experienced in years. But as the novelty wore off, the challenges of their generational gap became harder to ignore. Demi's insecurities began to resurface, and her desire to keep up with Ashton's younger, carefree lifestyle pushed her to her limits. Behind closed doors, their relationship wasn't as picture-perfect as it seemed. Ashton's alleged infidelities made headlines, and Demi's attempts to hold on to their connection only deepened her struggles with self-worth. It was during this time that she reportedly relapsed into substance abuse, a devastating blow after years of sobriety. The desire to be everything Ashton wanted, a partner, a friend, and someone who could match his youthful energy, became a destructive cycle that left Demi feeling more isolated than ever. As their marriage crumbled, Demi faced yet another public humiliation. The tabloids were relentless, painting her as a has-been who couldn't keep up with her younger husband. But what the public didn't see was the pain and vulnerability that drove her actions. For Demi, the relationship wasn't about clinging to her youth. It was about finding someone who could fill the void left by years of loneliness and self-doubt. As Demi's marriage to Ashton dissolved, so did her grip on the carefully curated image she had spent decades building. By the time their divorce was finalized in 2013, Demi was not only grappling with the fallout of a highly publicized breakup, but also facing the harsh reality of her waning relevance in Hollywood. The tabloids were relentless, often framing her as a woman whose best days were behind her. But behind the headlines was a far more complicated story of a woman fighting to reclaim her identity while battling demons she had tried to suppress for years. Her daughters, Rumor, Scout, and Tallulah, were caught in the crossfire of their mother's personal struggles and the media frenzy surrounding her life. For years, they had admired their mother's resilience, but they couldn't ignore the ways her choices impacted their own lives. Demi's relationship with Ashton had been a particular point of tension. For Rumor, it wasn't just about the age gap or the constant attention their relationship drew. It was personal. Ashton had been her childhood crush, someone she once fantasized about, only to watch her mother marry him. It was an emotional betrayal she struggled to reconcile. But Rumor wasn't the only one affected. Tallulah and Scout, though younger, were equally aware of the challenges their family faced. Demi's struggle with addiction during her marriage to Ashton hadn't gone unnoticed. Tallulah, in particular, found it difficult to understand why her mother seemed to prioritize her relationship over her role as a parent. The strain between Demi and her daughters grew, and by the mid-2010s, their once close bond was fractured. Demi's memoir, Inside Out, later shed light on the complexity of these relationships. She revealed that her attempts to connect with Ashton often came at the expense of her daughters. One of the most shocking admissions was her willingness to indulge Ashton's fantasies to keep him interested, including agreeing to bring a third party into their relationship. This decision, she admitted, left her feeling hollow and compromised, further eroding her sense of self. For her daughters, these revelations weren't entirely surprising but still painful to process. Tallulah, who had struggled with her own issues of self-worth, saw parallels between her mother's experiences and her own. By the age of 14, Tallulah had begun drinking heavily, a habit that quickly spiraled out of control. She later admitted that her descent into addiction was fueled by a desperate need for escape, from the pressures of growing up in the spotlight and from the weight of her family's complicated dynamics. By 15, Tallulah's drinking had become so severe that she nearly died from alcohol poisoning. Her relationship with her mother was strained, and at one point she was estranged from the family. It wasn't until she sought professional help and began her journey toward sobriety that she started to mend those broken bonds. But even as Tallulah worked to rebuild her life, she couldn't ignore the impact her mother's choices had on her own struggles. Rumor, too, carried the weight of her family's dysfunction. Growing up as the eldest daughter of two of Hollywood's biggest stars came with its own set of challenges. From a young age, she was scrutinized for her appearance, often unfairly compared to her famous parents. Gossip magazines were ruthless, picking apart her looks and feeding into the insecurities she already felt. She later revealed that no matter what she did, whether it was changing her hairstyle or losing weight, she always felt like she had to earn love, not just from the public but from her own family. Demi's daughters weren't the only ones grappling with the fallout of their mother's choices. The media's portrayal of Demi as a desperate, aging actress wasn't just cruel, it was damaging. For a woman who had already battled feelings of inadequacy for most of her life, the constant criticism only deepened her insecurities. Yet, even in the face of relentless public shaming, Demi refused to fade quietly into the background. She tried to refocus her energy on causes that mattered to her, including co-founding the Thorn Foundation, an organization aimed at combating child exploitation. But even this noble endeavor wasn't free from scrutiny. Critics questioned her motivations, pointing out the irony of her involvement given the controversies surrounding her own past. The allegations about her kissing her 15-year-old co-star Philip Tanzini resurfaced, reigniting debates about her behavior and its appropriateness. The hypocrisy accusations didn't stop there. Ashton Kutcher, her former partner and co-founder of the foundation, also faced backlash for his alleged involvement in inappropriate situations during his Hollywood career. The juxtaposition of their philanthropic efforts with the allegations against them left many wondering whether their activism was genuine or simply a way to rehabilitate their tarnished images. For Demi, these criticisms were a harsh reminder that no matter how much she tried to move forward, her past would always follow her. Her daughters, too, faced similar challenges. The trauma they had endured growing up didn't just disappear with time. It manifested in different ways, through addiction, strained relationships, and their own struggles with self-identity. By the mid-2010s, however, there were signs of healing within the family. Tallulah, after years of estrangement, moved back in with Demi, marking the beginning of a slow but meaningful reconciliation. For Demi, it was an opportunity to show her daughters that she was capable of change. She began to take accountability for her actions, acknowledging the pain she had caused and the mistakes she had made as a mother. As Demi began the slow process of rebuilding her relationship with her daughters, the path to healing was anything but straightforward. The years of tension and emotional distance couldn't be erased overnight. For Tallulah, the decision to move back in with her mother wasn't just about proximity. It was about finding a way to reconcile the pain of the past with the possibility of a better future. Yet, even in this tentative reunion, the lingering effects of their shared trauma made every step toward forgiveness feel like a delicate balancing act. Tallulah later admitted that the decision to seek help for her addiction wasn't entirely her own. The wake-up call came after years of struggling with alcohol abuse and depression, culminating in an incident where she overdosed and was nearly lost to her family forever. For a mother who had spent much of her adult life grappling with her own demons, seeing her daughter on the brink of destruction was a devastating reminder of how deeply her choices had impacted her children. It wasn't just about the headlines or the public perception anymore, it was about survival, both hers and her daughters. Rumor and Scout, though not as publicly vocal about their struggles during this time, were also navigating the complexities of their family dynamic. Rumor, the eldest, took on a role that often placed her in the middle, trying to mediate between her mother and her sisters while dealing with her own sense of loss and confusion. Scout, the quieter and more introspective of the three, watched the unfolding drama from a distance, choosing to focus on her own personal growth while remaining cautiously supportive of her siblings. The media, of course, wasn't kind during this period of transition. Demi's attempts to reconcile with her daughters were met with skepticism, with tabloids framing her efforts as self-serving or performative. Critics questioned whether her public displays of motherhood were genuine or simply an attempt to repair her tarnished image. Every public outing with her daughters became fodder for speculation, with photographers and journalists eager to capture any moment of tension or discord. But behind the media frenzy, something genuine was beginning to emerge. Demi's daughters, though still scarred by the past, began to see their mother in a different light. Her vulnerability, something she had so carefully hidden for much of their childhood, was now on full display. In her memoir, Demi admitted to feeling immense guilt for the pain she had caused her daughters, writing candidly about her regrets and the ways her own childhood trauma had blinded her to the needs of her children. For Tallulah, this newfound honesty from her mother was both comforting and unsettling. She had spent years resenting Demi for what she saw as neglect, only to realize that her mother had been struggling in ways she couldn't have understood as a child. It didn't excuse the mistakes, but it offered context, a lens through which she could start to see her mother not as a larger-than-life Hollywood figure, but as a flawed human being. The process of reconciliation wasn't without its setbacks. Old wounds resurfaced, and moments of progress were often followed by emotional backslides. Rumor, who had always been the most outspoken of the three, confronted her mother directly during this time, challenging her to take full accountability for her actions. Demi, to her credit, didn't shy away from these conversations. Instead, she leaned into the discomfort, acknowledging the ways she had fallen short and promising to do better. By this point, Demi had also begun to take a closer look at her own life. Her career, once defined by blockbuster roles and leading lady status, had taken a back seat to her personal journey of self-discovery. She started to focus on projects that resonated with her on a deeper level, using her platform to speak out about issues that mattered to her. Though her public persona remained complicated, it was clear that she was trying to channel her experiences into something meaningful. Her daughters, too, began to find their footing in their respective paths. Rumor, after years of struggling to step out from her parents' shadow, found her voice as a performer, earning praise for her work in film and on Broadway. Scout, ever the introspective one, pursued her passions in music and art, creating a space for herself away from the spotlight. Tallulah, having faced her addiction head-on, became an advocate for mental health awareness, using her own story to help others who were struggling. For the Willis-Moore family, this period marked the beginning of a new chapter. The pain and dysfunction that had once defined their lives didn't disappear, but it no longer dictated their relationships. They were learning, slowly but surely, how to coexist in a way that honored both their shared history and their individual growth. Still, the specter of the past loomed large. Demi's daughters couldn't forget the years of emotional absence and public controversies, and Demi herself couldn't escape the guilt that came with those memories. But rather than letting these feelings define them, they chose to move forward together, one difficult conversation at a time. For the public, this transformation was a revelation. Demi, once painted as a cautionary tale of Hollywood excess and personal failure, was now being seen in a new light. She wasn't perfect, far from it, but she was trying. And for a woman who had spent most of her life trying to meet impossible standards, that was enough. As the family continued to rebuild, they faced the inevitable challenges of reconciling their public and private lives. The cameras, always present, captured their moments of joy and pain, turning their healing journey into a spectacle for the world to consume. But for Demi and her daughters, this time wasn't about the headlines or the paparazzi. It was about reclaiming their story on their own terms. Despite their progress as a family, the road to healing was still fraught with challenges, both internal and external. Demi's daughters had spent years reconciling their complicated feelings about their mother. Forgiveness wasn't instantaneous. It was a slow process that demanded honesty, vulnerability, and a willingness to confront the raw truths about their shared past. Tallulah, in particular, wrestled with a mix of emotions. Moving back in with her mother had been a leap of faith, one she wasn't entirely sure she was ready for. But as they spent more time together, the walls between them began to crumble. Tallulah saw glimpses of the mother she had always longed for, someone present, attentive, and willing to face her flaws. It didn't erase the years of pain, but it gave her hope that things could be different. For Rumor, the process was more complex. She had always been the one to push back, to demand accountability in ways her sisters weren't always comfortable doing. Rumor's love for her mother was fierce, but so was her need for closure. She wanted Demi to understand the impact of her choices, not just on their family, but on Rumor's sense of self. Growing up in the shadow of her parents' fame had been isolating enough without the added weight of her mother's very public struggles. Scout, ever the mediator, played a crucial role in bridging the gaps between her family members. While she carried her own scars from their tumultuous history, she had a remarkable ability to see the bigger picture. Scout often acted as the glue holding the family together, encouraging her mother and sisters to have the difficult conversations they might have otherwise avoided. As Demi worked to rebuild her relationships with her daughters, she also began to focus on herself. Years of therapy, self-reflection, and sobriety helped her confront the pain she had buried for so long. She started to see her life not just as a series of mistakes, but as a testament to resilience. For Demi, healing wasn't about erasing the past, it was about learning to live with it. Her memoir, Inside Out, became a pivotal part of that journey. In its pages, Demi laid bare her struggles with addiction, her complicated relationships, and the childhood trauma that shaped her. The book wasn't just a cathartic release for Demi. It was a way to reclaim her narrative in a world that had so often twisted it. For her daughters, reading their mother's unfiltered truths was both painful and illuminating. It forced them to confront parts of their story they hadn't fully processed, but it also gave them a deeper understanding of the woman behind the headlines. The public reception to Demi's memoir was polarizing. Some praised her for her bravery and honesty, while others criticized her for airing the family's dirty laundry. The criticisms didn't surprise Demi. She had spent a lifetime being judged by people who knew little about her beyond the headlines. But this time, the judgment didn't sting as much. For once, Demi was at peace with herself, and that was all that mattered. As her daughters continued to carve out their own paths, Demi found joy in watching them thrive. Rumor's success on Broadway, Scout's creative pursuits, and Tallulah's advocacy work were all sources of pride. For a woman who had once feared she would never have a meaningful relationship with her children, seeing them flourish was a reminder that redemption was possible. The family's journey wasn't without setbacks. Old wounds had a way of resurfacing at unexpected moments, and the pressure of living in the public eye remained a constant challenge. But they had learned how to navigate these obstacles together, leaning on one another in ways they never had before. For Demi, this newfound closeness with her daughters was the culmination of years of hard work and introspection. She knew she could never undo the mistakes of the past, but she also knew that those mistakes didn't have to define her future. Demi's life had been a whirlwind of highs and lows, a story of triumph and tragedy that often felt too surreal to be true. But through it all, she had found a way to keep moving forward. Even as the family continued to heal, questions linger about Demi's legacy. The controversies that had once defined her public image were impossible to ignore, and the media's fascination with her life showed no signs of waning. But for Demi, the opinions of outsiders mattered less than the bonds she had rebuilt with her daughters. Her story wasn't just about survival, it was about transformation, about finding light in the darkest corners and using it to illuminate a path forward. The world might never fully understand the complexities of Demi Moore, but for her daughters, she was more than the scandals and headlines. She was a mother, a flawed, imperfect, but deeply loving one. And for Demi, that was enough. With that, we have reached the end of today's video. If you have come this far with us, be sure to check out other videos on the channel.